my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. It is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And helping me break it all down, a very special guest in the building. She is a multimedia creative, a journalist, and host, as seen on a couple publications you may have heard of, like Rolling Stone, The Fader, Vibe, High Snobiety, and more. Jennifer Mota, how you feeling?
Feeling good. That was a dope ass intro.
I try, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause I've been on a couple podcasts where they really just fucked up everything that I do. So I try to show some respect to set the tone, you know?
Yeah, very energetic. I fuck with it.
Okay, good. So listen, I mean, we're going to be getting into a few different things as we typically do on the show. We're going to get into some of the nonsense from this last week. We'll also talk about someone from our community who's doing some incredible things and getting honored. I mean, so we always start with the nonsense, and we're going to be talking about something I'm consistently feel like I speak about, but it needs to be spoken more, is this idea of white supremacy in Hollywood, right? And I know you're somebody who works in entertainment. You've interviewed a slew of different people throughout, you know, the entertainment industry. This is a problem, and we have a very prominent actor who's been a part of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, talking out about this, which I want to get into. We're also going to talk about Karens and how there's a company who is trying to use the evil of Karens for good in a way that we can all benefit from. So I want to get to that. And then we've been seeing everybody kind of like wilding out on social media via memes about the price of eggs. So we're going to touch on that, and we're going to kind of dive into what the fuck is going on with eggs right now. I don't know. First of all, are you a big fan of eggs for breakfast?
I'm not. I feel it's crazy because I grew up in my parents' struggle era. Like eggs, noodles, and hot dogs.
Yeah.
I feel like I ate so much of it that
right.
I can turn off the eggs.
Yeah, you know what? I feel like I go through phases where I just am disgusted by eggs, and luckily for me, I'm in a phase right now where I'm disgusted by eggs. So I haven't even looked at the price of eggs, but I'm seeing everything on social media. So I want to get into the nonsense that is that. And then on a positive side of things, and I guess this is kind of like, half positive, but we do have someone who is the only Latino performer nominated for this year's Oscars. So we'll talk about her and dive into that conversation a bit more. But let's just start out. Let's get all the BS, the nonsense out there first. And we'll do it in a segment called For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the
we're talking to Variety specifically about Black Panther's success, right? And he's saying how it's more than just a box office hit to them. And he's explaining that the movie's also a game changer because it, quote, proves that producers lie about wanting white faces in films, right? And he's basically saying that the excuse a lot of producers give for the lack of diversity in Hollywood is the fact that the audience just resonates with white faces, right? Those are the only people they can enjoy on a screen, And he talks about how the media's focus on putting white people on the screen is inherently white supremacist. And he also touches on our community as a whole, where he says it's not just confined to the Hollywood Hills, but in Latin America, we have a serious problem with white supremacists. And he describes how, quote, racism is taught at home to many Latinos, such as racist sayings like marry someone with light skin to better the race. And, I'm sure we've all grown up hearing those different things, but kind of hearing this entire conversation from him, somebody who works in entertainment, you're in front of the camera a lot as well. I mean, what's kind of your take hearing that, maybe even your own experiences in general?
Yeah, I have so much. I will start off by saying everything from the branding of Latinidad, of what the world depicts of Latinidad, what is marketed to the world, to Latin American music, media, politics, all those industries and spaces, they're all products of white supremacy and racism, all of them.
Mm.
And I'll say that first as an experience, as first as someone that works in these spaces, my experience, and just understanding that the first thing that we always have to take note of is like, we're 33 countries. That's 33 countries filled with different cultures, ethnicities, races, different unique ideologies, and we come from the Caribe, right? We're Caribeans, where our parents come from the Caribbean. I have more in common with Jamaicans than I do with somebody from Chile. The only thing that keeps us tied under this big umbrella is probably religion and Spanish. And sometimes our Spanish ain't even the same because we have our own dialect, our own slang.
Right.
And, there's always this big running joke like, oh, when you hear a Puerto Rican or Dominican talk, and it's just like, they don't understand. You get what I'm saying? So
right.
Just in that, like, we understand that there's so many different differences. But the way Latinidad was branded, it really upheld white supremacy in a way that the closer you or the proximity you are to whiteness, the more chances you will get to be seen, to be visible, to get opportunities. Have you ever heard of El Sistema de Casa, the color?
No. Talk to me about that.
In racism and everything that comes with the violence of racism, we all know that shit's global. When you go to Latin America and you talk about this, the first thing they'll tell you is like, oh, that don't exist here. That's American shit. Like, that's the US shit. And it's not true.
Sure.
It's just that in the US, it was violent and we had actual laws. Like here we had like laws where like a black and white person couldn't get married, while in Latin America, they motivated the mixing of races not to like create unity, but more to whiten the race, which is what he touches on. To limpiar la raza, to white, to create new breeds of lighter complexion family members. And that falls all under this case system. So what the case system was, it was literally a chart of, here we had the one drop rule, right? In Latin America, and I believe in India too, the system pretty much breaks down like the social hierarchy by your race and what you're mixed with. So if you were Spanish, white, you obviously fell high in the social hierarchy. If you were black, you were all the way in the bottom. And that's where a lot of names like mulatto, lobo, chino come from. Like a lot of words that we use in Latin America now literally come from that case system. So the more mixed you were, the higher you were in the social class. Like the more proximity you had to whiteness, obviously the social class, what type of job you would get. And that was years ago, centuries ago, but like that still exists in politics. It still exists in media and in music. And when we think of genres like reggaeton, like I'm gonna use reggaeton and hip hop. When you're in Anglo hip hop, like you hear black, you see black, right? Reggaeton, that is black music, and there is no black representation at all. Like it's very, very minimal. And it's a constant battle when it comes to colorism, because you see so many black creators constantly innovating and creating things, and they're constantly told that their music is ghetto, it's ratchet, it can't be included in certain spaces. But you'll have a white artist, not from a specific culture, create that, and all the flowers are given to that person, or they're like innovative, or like So you see that happening a lot, and it's always happened with black music. But again, because media and music pretty much uphold those standards of the case system and colorism, like that's reflected and seen on in telenovelas, in our shows, and everything we grew up watching. And it's why even non-Latinos have a hard time understanding how mixed we are. Why Black Latinos have a hard time navigating certain spaces, and even like white Latinos being seen as like, oh, are you Latino? Like you look white. Yes, we have white people. We have white people. We have Black people. But in Hollywood, the way Latinidad was branded, it's like there are the white Latinos, but there are white Latinos with spice. You feel me? Like
Right,
they have a
right.
little bit of color.
Yeah, yeah.
So like when they see someone that's probably like the actress that we're seeing now, like Ana de Armas is the person that won.
Yeah, from Blonde, yeah, who we'll talk about her later, but yeah.
Yeah, and even the artist, the actress from the Queen's Gambit, like they're Latina, and
Yeah,
you know, in Hollywood, they're most likely having a way easier process
yeah.
in achieving and getting roles than someone else. But at the same time, they're, you know, the first thing people aren't thinking is they're Latina. They're
Right.
thinking white, you know, and
Yeah.
Latina after. Um,
Right,
whereas,
right.
whereas when it's people of color or Black people that are Latinos, if they go into a space, the first thing that they're probably gonna flag is like you're Black, you know,
Right, right.
like you're not the Latino that we're looking for. So it's very
Mhm.
complex when it comes to what
Yeah.
world of Hollywood or entertainment we're
Right.
talking about, and then like where we come from too. And I think he does such a great job with explaining everything because
Yeah.
I'm going on a rant, but I'm almost done.
No, you're good, you're good.
He does such a great job in explaining how it literally took a movie made by African Americans to create
Mhm.
this visibility because we don't have that
Right,
visibility in Latin America. You know, it wasn't
right.
made by white directors in the US. It was made by African Americans. And it's so crazy
Mhm.
how fun. The movie is literally called Black Panther, but the real Black Panther movement opened the doors for so many Latino movements like the Young Lords
Yeah.
and
I was gonna say that,
the
yeah.
civil rights movement opened doors for
Uh-huh.
immigration policy, and it's just like this is something that has consistently happened always, like
Right.
because of African Americans and what their organization, we have benefited so much of it.
Mhm.
And when he made that note, I was just like, I'm really, really grateful that he called that shit out because it's not like, oh, a Latino was intentional about creating this space because
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, when Latinos director create stuff, we're still seeing that colorism. We're still seeing
Yeah.
that problem. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, those were some of my thoughts.
No, I think you hit on so many different things that I wanna get into. I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, like, the remnants of everything we're talking about run so much deeper than just the United States of America, right? Like, of course, there is a problem in this country that has consistently upheld the idea of white supremacy, but even in Latin America, we've been poisoned by it because of essentially Christianity, right? And what happened in Europe, when you had the Spanish and all of that was like, the one drop rule existing in those days as well, and trying to convert people to Christianity. And then if you're not, if you weren't born Christian, you're still lower on that totem pole now, even though you converted, right? And all of that like has turned into the idea of the color of your skin. And we've adapted that in Latin America where we have we're hating ourselves essentially because we're trying to abide by these sort of white supremacist values that were created by the colonizers in the European, countries from long times ago. But I think, yeah, it is really interesting. I'll touch on that last point you brought up about this being a Black movie that then invited Latinos to be a part of the conversation, right? And it's also funny that we have so much. I know we have this superiority complex, in our community about people's color of skin and all these different things. And we would be that much stronger if we just decided to stop that bullshit and come together, right? And people fail to realize that. And I think the Black Panthers with Young Lords, like that's a great correlation to that as well. And I think when you talk about our community specifically, to your point about like we're all incredibly different and maybe we just share the same language, and probably food to a degree, right? Even though we might season it a little bit differently. There's a lot of foods that are pretty universal from all over, the diaspora of Latinidad. But I think we exist in this really tough place in this country, right? Specifically when we're talking about the US, where we have a very distinct identity from one another, right? That separates us, that creates elitism amongst our community, right? Puerto Ricans are naturalized citizens, so they might feel superior to anybody else, right? Because they're not, having to worry about crossing a border or anything like that. We see it with, the Cuban community who, many of whom in Florida are voting Republican and criticizing immigrants coming over, but, whatever it might be. And we fall into this really difficult place of are we conforming to come together under one umbrella, right? Are we giving up parts of ourselves? Or is it something we naturally kind of have to do in order to survive and have our voices heard collectively? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of nuance to the things that you're talking about, and it's a lot of kind of difficult conversations that we sort of have to navigate. And I think that we're kind of getting to the heart of why we haven't collectively had a really empowering movement in the same way that the Black community has, right? The African American community, I should say, is because they can rally behind common causes, right? Because they share the same lineage, essentially, right? From being, brought here from Africa against their will. They all share in that same trauma, that same pain, and then, everything that happened following that in this country. And because we all have these different issues, we're kind of, finding it hard to support one another. But then the U.S. as a whole likes to blanket us into one type of person as well, right? Or if we're talking about Hollywood, to kind of bring it full circle, they tell one specific story of Latinidad, right? And it's oftentimes, you'd see a lot of, Mexican representation, Mexican stories, and also Puerto Rican because of things like New York, the proximity to New York City and those stories, right? But we're forgetting about everybody else that exists in Latinidad and that doesn't represent them. So it is a difficult thing to kind of navigate, because then it's like, where does our collective power sort of come from? And I'd be curious to kind of hear what your perspective is there as you bring up the fact that we all are incredibly different, culturally.
Yeah, I feel like what I will say, I think the way the U.S. is so black and white in terms of labeling,
Yeah.
they've never really understood, even in music, they've just never understood what to do with Latinos. Like,
Right.
birth of hip hop, I like to say Afro-Caribbeans created that shit, because it was Afro-Caribbeans from Jamaica, Bahama, Puerto Rico, like different places that created this entire movement. People don't talk about that. People say, oh, there was African Americans, there were Puerto Ricans, there were a few other Latinos. Like, there's so much labeling, but at the end of the day, like, hip hop is ancestral music.
Sure.
Breaks, everything that was created, those are all Afro-Caribbean influences, even when it comes to like the breakdancing and everything coming from Congo and all that. Like, the entire movement was made from Afro-Caribbeans. When it came to the marketing, and at the time that when the industry stepped into hip hop, they didn't know what to do with Latinos. So that's where like Latin freestyle was born, because they were just like,
but also not to cut you off, but it also, we kind of did it to ourselves to a degree, though, right? Because we find so much shame in the African lineage of Latinos, we're willing to give up our own history just to not be talked about in the same sentence as Black people, right?
I agree.
We're willing to not have our story told just because it then separates us from Black people, which is absolutely fucking crazy to even think about.
I completely agree, because so much of the hip hop movement relied on the civil rights movement. It was storytelling. It went hand in hand, and a lot of I feel like that also played a huge role with us. And it even in the Caribbean conversation, like, I think sometimes Latinos from the Spanish speaking Caribbean be like, oh, we're always left out. But it's also like, at the same time, we have a lot of xenophobia, and we keep ourselves out of that conversation as well, where it's like, again, one of the first things I said was I identify more with a Jamaican than someone from Chile or Argentina, like culturally, everything. But I feel like the labeling of what Latinidad is has never really found a place, because we are so mixed. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, so many Caribbeans and so many Black Latinos are affected by police brutality. Like, this is specific to it's just specific to Black people overall, not just African Americans. It's specific to Black anybody. And
Well, even so, to build off of that, even there, because we can't be categorized, right? There are a lot of studies that also show that police will say that it was a white person that they pulled over, but it was actually a Latino, right? Because we in this gray area, so the numbers aren't actually accurate as far as like, police harassment or police
Yeah.
brutality on like the Latin community. That's another thing to consider.
Yeah, like this conversation is very nuanced in a
Yeah.
way that it's super interesting. I think that I also agree that we can never get on the same page because of race, because of the different communities that exist within Latinidad. I think the fact, again, I'm gonna go back to the branding, like the entire branding created like this fantasy that we're all like united, that we're all fighting for one another. And like, I lived in Puerto Rico in the Dominican Republic, and I have my flag here. We come from spaces that we prioritize our nationality before our race because of white supremacy, and if I hear the "I know black, I'm Dominican" joke one more time, I'm gonna go because DR is one of the blackest countries in Latin America. Does racism exist there? Yes, it does. Does xenophobia exist there? Yes, it does. But what's crazy to me is, as somebody that's been studying this and also just traveling all of Latin America, the most violent racism I've experienced have been in other countries. I think there's a type of blackness, black joy that's created in the Dominican Republic that is struggling and can't be seen because of the way racism is spoken about here in the States. Because yes, we come from a history of like literally forced colorism. We spoke about how historically we've been trained to think of like mejorando la raza, like a black and white person. I'm a product of that. Like my grandparents are literally black, indigenous, black and white. I'm a product of two light skins.
Right.
And when you hear a lot of their older conversations, it really reflected on like what beauty standards or what they were trying to work towards. And we come from that. And also like, because of like the disconnecting culture, when Dominicans come to the States, sometimes they look at African American, when they hear black, they think African American, which they think another culture. That's another miseducation that my people have. Because when you're in the country, like they know they're black and they know that they navigate as black people, but so much of our history was taken away from us. Our black education was taken away from us. And I think
or shame in general, the shame from your own community makes you.
I mean, the natural hair community is now having a moment, but like you're discriminated against in DR if you have curly hair. Like there's certain places you might not even get into if you have your afro out and stuff like that. Like that exists. That's still there. And when you think of like music, like so much of Dominican culture has influenced Latin music so much. When you think of merengue, when you think of the when you think of everything that's popping, but you're never gonna see like the pioneers or the actual creators like get their flowers as much as other genres because they're black and because they navigate in a way that is looked down upon. Where was I going with this?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think we could talk about this for hours because there is so, and I think the last part about it that I would just comment on is what also makes it more complex is that those of us who grew up here in the States or were born here in the States also have a different layer of experience, right? So it makes it even more complicated. And I think if I can say, the one thing that we can find common ground on is those of us who, have grown up here in the States, because when you do meet a racist person or an uninformed person, to them, we're all Mexican, right? Like that, like, and, so it's like this shared idea that we are lesser than, and nobody actually cares about the nuance of it all. And I think there is some unity in that. And then also, speaking to what you were talking about, like Latinos who are white passing, right? And we see them in Hollywood, and generally they're the ones who get the opportunity because they can play a multitude of roles, right? And don't have to, like we saw with Ana de Mars, who was playing Marilyn Monroe, who we're gonna talk about. Ana de Armas, but she looks as white as can be, right? If you didn't know her lineage, you wouldn't assume that she was Latino, right? And that has happened to me for forever as well. That's what the general basis of this podcast is, And I think it is difficult to navigate in general because we've also been taught that if you claim your otherness, it means less opportunities, in this country, in an industry like Hollywood, where, there are only specific roles for people who are very obviously Latino, and it's just incredibly difficult to navigate. I think, to your point, it is incredibly nuanced. I don't think we're going to solve it all today,
No,
but
no.
but I
My
think
thoughts
these are
were
just
like going all over when you ask questions because there's so many
yeah,
places I can start in.
yeah,
But
yeah,
what I was gonna say, as someone that spent time in the Caribe, I hope that we can just denationalize ourselves. Like, I'm proud of my flag,
yeah.
but I don't think a flag is representative of an entire group. And what I
Hmm.
will say is, racism exists everywhere, discrimination exists everywhere, but that's all because of elitism and white
Yes.
supremacy too.
Hmm.
And I'm that's something that I'm slowly and just starting to kind of like really align with myself. That I'm proud of being from a specific culture, but also having that understanding that we need to denationalize certain cultures to kind of get to a place of unity. Also,
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's beautifully said. I think there is a need for unity. A lot of the things we talked about today are the reason why we have a lack of it, and hopefully more conversations like this begin to spark some sort of like way we could all kind of come together and rally behind a common thing, because it's just necessary right now. We're being left out of too many things.
yeah.
Now moving on to something slightly lighter here. Let's talk about Karens real quick. And this is a new service that is allowing people to hire Karens to deal with annoying issues. And it's called Karens for Hire. And they will handle any conflict that is within the confines of the law. So they will call your bank and dispute charges for you. The service has apparently already attracted more than 2,000 clients, and the testimonials on their website are positive, right? And one customer working with them was talking about a shady appraiser for their home. And their testimonial was, quote, "When the Karen was done, the appraisal value raised $40,000. Without the help of Karens for Hire, I wouldn't have been able to refinance my home and lower my monthly mortgage payment," they wrote in a glowing review. And it's also affordable. Karen's tasks will cost between $50 and $75, and they can be as little as $10, while most max out at about $100. I mean, this is a nice way to put the Karens of the world to work instead of harassing us in the streets. Would you hire a service like this?
Yes, where women pick up your sword. Like,
Yeah.
I'm quoting my friend Gata. She's a historian, and
Mhm.
she loves saying that quote. And it's just like that was the first thing I thought of. Like, if we can, if the best strategy to get things and save our time and energy is using someone's white privilege, yes,
Right.
women, pick up your sword, fight for me.
I love the way you phrase that. Are you somebody who will argue like claims and like ask for the manager
Oh,
and all these things?
I used to write letters.
Wow. Okay, let's
Like,
talk about
I,
it.
do you guys have? Where are you from? You from Jersey? Or
Yeah. New York and
so
Jersey,
y'all
yeah.
have Wawa?
Yeah.
Like,
Uh-huh.
I would write letters to Wawa and I'd get like checks in the mail because I was
What?
like, yes, I was that person. Like, I remember once I came from a club like at 3 a.m. I
Yeah.
really wanted my milkshake. I wanted a mint milkshake, and it was just done so terribly. Like, you could see the syrup all over the bottom, and
Yeah.
I sent a 3-paragraph email of how upset I was.
Wow.
Oh, and disappointed, and how I was a frequent like visitor, and I got
Right.
$14 in the mail.
Wow. You know what?
I
I've
had
never
time though.
right. Well, but I mean that's worth it at the end of the day. I've never really been that person unless it's like a charge on my credit card, and I
Yeah.
will I've begun to do it with hotels, because I just don't I'm a diamond member, not to brag, of Hilton Honors. So I expect a certain level of hotel when I visit at this point. So I've definitely sent some angry emails about certain hotels I've stayed at and gotten my points back for the hotel. That's been my new thing. But I didn't realize like even as little as Wawa complaining about your milkshake, they're gonna try and make it up to you. That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been, I worked in the food industry. I worked in many
Yeah,
industries. So, like, I do have a level of empathy
sure.
when it comes to, like, service because I've been in that position. But it's like, I was the only customer there. There was no excuse for me to get that
Right.
nasty ass milkshake.
Right. I used to work in a movie theater when I was younger, so I did the same thing. You know, I was making the popcorn, serving all the drinks and the hot dogs and all that. So I definitely do have empathy. But yeah, there are certain things that are just inexcusable. You know, you have to have like at least some sort of standard. Especially now that like you're getting older, and it's like this is my hard-earned money. If I'm coming here, I'm
Exactly.
expecting a certain experience. I'm not trying to just give this shit away for no reason. Like I want to be getting the experience that I thought I
Yeah,
was coming here for, you know?
for sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, Karen's for hire. Check that out if you need somebody to argue on your behalf. And last thing I want to talk about here on the nonsense. Let's talk about the price of eggs right now because a lot of people have been posting the memes about eggs, not being able to afford them. So there was this article, and I haven't, like I said at the beginning of the show, I haven't really bought eggs in a long time, so I was unaware of this phenomena happening. But I was doing some research, and there was an interesting article with Yahoo Finance and the Farm Action president, who goes by the name of Joe Maxwell, and they're talking about how egg prices have skyrocketed over the past year, up to nearly 60%, and that's according to the latest inflation data. Now, this organization, the Farm Action, is calling the FTC to investigate the egg industry. Now, what I found was, and I didn't know, apparently companies are claiming that there's this thing called the avian flu that is killing their chickens essentially, right? And this person from the Farm Action, the president, he says the avian flu is real, but the consumers know that in this country, something's wrong at the grocery store with a 138% increase in the price they're paying for eggs. And he says, it's obvious to us when we look at the profit that these companies are making, which is over 960%, which is fucking crazy, that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And then goes on talking about the flu. And he says 50 million laying hens did die from this flu. And that's from 2021 to 2022. But he said that actually only reflects a loss of about 5% of the production eggs in this country. So it doesn't justify the 138% increase that we're seeing at grocery stores, and the 960% increase in gross profits for the largest egg producer in this country, who has not even experienced one case of the avian flu. All right. That's a lot of crazy statistics, a lot of information to basically say that these people are price gouging the shit out of us, and nobody is doing a damn thing to fix it, to help out the everyday person, right? And then this is the shit that gets pushed onto like politics, and the Republican Party will be like, oh, Joe Biden, blame for inflation, this, that. And it's funny that nobody's pointing the finger at these giant corporations that are taking advantage of us. The same thing happened with gas. When the gas prices were going crazy, these gas companies were recording record profits, right? They weren't raising the price because they needed to. They were raising it because they knew they could, because everybody was claiming this, crazy gas shortage that was happening. So again, it's just this, man, the capitalist society that we live in has no problem taking advantage of the everyday person. And I do blame the government for not creating systems that protect us from this. But man, it just is it speaks to the sadness of, I guess, man, the world that we live in right now.
Yeah. I'm gonna be real with you. Like, my first thought goes into the psychology of everything.
Sure.
Because I mentioned earlier how like I grew up in my parents' struggle era. Like eggs used to, like, you would talk about eggs and it was kind of associated even with like low income and poor.
Mm-hmm.
Like
right.
Sometimes a lot of Caribbeans, we eat rice with eggs because we're going through the struggle,
Yeah, a lot of our food was made out of the struggle. It's something like rice and beans. It was cheap, and we can make it taste good
together.
Right.
So like now, what I'm finding interesting is a lot of conversations on how like now eggs are kind of symbolizing how well you're doing now. So like if you have eggs in your fridge, you're doing well. Like you're not poor. And
Right.
I
It's
felt like I
crazy.
saw like a TikTok of someone kind of talking about that and why like so
Yeah.
many people are also panicking in it. And I also mentioned like it just reminds me of like that toilet paper frenzy from like COVID. Like
Yeah.
was going crazy for toilet paper. Like they needed to have
Right.
toilet paper. And what's
Right.
crazy about it, like the psychology of that was that like toilet paper symbolizes like you eating well because of like your digestive
Right.
system. So
Right.
like psychologically, people are like, we need toilet paper.
Right. I love where you're going. So I want to kind of pause on that for a second because there is this thing for many of us who grew up a certain type of way, or even if you just know about the history of our community, especially those who immigrated here with not much to their name. The idea of taking care of yourself wasn't even like a thought in your mind. Like you're just surviving, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that like, we keep getting brought to back to that place because of like the capitalist nature of our society and the fact that that's okay, right? The fact that it's okay for some people to be struggling to put gas in their tank, right? As long and nobody really gives a fuck if the because the rich people are always going to be able to afford gas, right? The
Yeah.
people who are doing well aren't going to be phased by the extra increase of $2 on a carton of eggs, right? So nobody gives a fuck, right? We're all okay with this. Nobody is really sounding the alarm about the fact that these companies are price gouging the everyday person for no reason whatsoever. We're hearing about it. People are speaking about it, but nothing gets done because it doesn't actually affect anyone that matters, right? Anybody that really matters in the eyes of this country. And it just speaks to that mindset of the have-nots and the people who do have, right? And
Yeah.
that until it affects that upper class of people, nothing will get done. And again, it's this very sad state of the world that we live in. It's a reflection of that. As silly of a topic as it is, it begins to reflect that.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point. And it's like one of the first things that you said was just like there's all this commotion, but nothing's actually being done. Like we're seeing a lot of
Right.
news, we're seeing a lot of like the Twitter conversations and everyone
Hmm.
talking about it, but it's not nothing's being done. What's crazy is
Yeah.
I read somewhere that 4 weeks ago, like eggs got to the highest peak, like it peaked to the price that it'll be. It's
Mm.
gonna be like that for a while.
Wow. It but also what to my point, what we're talking about as well. The last thing I would say on it is look at what the politicians are saying about things like this, right? They're using it as an opportunity to point fingers at the other side and say, look what they're doing to you, right? The inflation is out of control because of the Democrats and Joe Biden and all these things when they're ignoring what the truth is of the fact that these corporate companies are always finding a way and always given a free reign to take advantage of the everyday person, be it taxes, be it price gouging, whatever it might be. And then you have people who are not well off being brainwashed into thinking that it's the fault of the powers that be, and that's who you have to fight against, and that's your evil sort of person that you have to be conscious of because they're trying to take advantage of you. And it's like we just keep pushing the blame around to everybody except for the people that are responsible. And it continues to speak to this idea I say far too much that politicians genuinely do not give a fuck about the people that they are representing. All they care about is staying in power and making their high-priced donors happy.
Oh yeah, and this conversation really reminds me of, especially when you said the have and the have-nots, it's like the divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about it in the beginning how like united we would be even better, but
Yeah.
because of divide and conquer politically, like it's only
Sure.
benefited the government, like making
Yeah.
sure that we're all separated and not really
Mm-hmm.
they have always benefited off of that. And we come
Yeah.
from, you mentioned like we come from countries and parents that like all they've known is survival, that it's literally in their
Mm-hmm.
identity. Like
Right.
I have literally en la lucha tatted because
Mm.
that's almost like an automatic saying when people would say like, oh, ¿cómo estás? And you'd be like, en la lucha, like we're in
Right.
the fight.
Right.
Like it's so
Yeah.
embedded in us that like, yeah, we're out here
Yeah.
surviving and we're fighting, but
Right.
to a point that does become like very toxic. And part
Yeah.
of that toxicity is like we just become so ingrained in like, oh yeah, we have to survive, we have to make sure, like it's almost like
Right. We normalize
an
it.
anxiety of like, oh, we have to make sure that we have these eggs, we have to make sure
Right.
that we're looking out for us the separation aspect where it's just like Latinos, but even within Latinos, everyone is separated. That survival mentality.
Yeah.
Like it gets like tighter and tighter the group as the group keeps revolving. Like you mentioned,
Sure.
Puerto Ricans having their own flight, maybe Mexicans having their own flight. And in topics like this, like that's when you really start realizing like how divide and conquer really works. Because in reality, this is something that's really affecting low income middle class and just keeps on building.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like these companies are already making crazy money. Their profit margins are ridiculous as it is. Like these CEOs are already rich. The elite are already rich. And it really just speaks to the ultimate greed that you're okay with watching people struggle while you're literally just fucking burning money away because you have too much of it. You know what I mean? Like you're looking for ways to hide it while other people are struggling. And again, nobody gives a shit to actually help out the everyday person.
Yeah.
And it's just really, really scary. And you know, I mean, it's not anything new, but fuck, it's just crazy to think that nobody really cares. It's a scary idea. And that's very depressing. So I wanna get into something that's a little more positive.
I want to survive.
Right? Yeah, nobody. We're all fucked. What's the point? You know. All right, so we're gonna talk about somebody who is getting a nod here for the Oscars, the only person representing you know, the Latin community as a whole. So we'll talk about that in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so this is positive, but it also is another kind of like has a sad undertone to it. But we have Ana de Armas, who we've talked about a little bit in earlier in the show. Of course, you got to give it up to her. It's a beautiful thing, you know, that she is you know, getting that recognition. I would love to always be able to celebrate anybody from our community who is getting their flowers, you know, regardless of there's a lot of kind of backlash about the way that she looks or if she represents whatever. But either way, you know, it's a beautiful thing to kind of see that nod. And I think there are people nominated behind the scenes, like behind the camera, who are nominated for an Oscar, which sadly is great, but it also doesn't mean that much, right? Because these are people we never see nor hear about. So of course, you know, they might be getting some opportunities. But you know, for what it's worth, it's definitely something I think worth celebrating to see somebody getting that high praise on something like the Oscars, which I know, you know, some people, and I'm curious where you stand on this, where some people might sort of say, why do we even need that sort of validation? But you know, as artists, I guess you work hard on your shit and you want it to be recognized. But I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on it all.
I'm still kind of processing this. What I will say is, first, there was a comment that you made, and it was about like the people behind the scenes getting.
Yeah.
I think that's really dope because at the end of the day, those people behind the scenes, like once they keep going up the ranks, hopefully they'll be the ones that will be able to create more projects that have more diversity. You know, because
fingers crossed,
celebrating the actress, right, and her win. I really think we should also be that same energy. We need to. Definitely need to celebrate the producers or anyone that's getting nominated behind the scenes, because those are the people that are most likely going to create that the diversity that we need. Unless this actress is intentionally making space for people that are darker than her. Like her Latinidad, to me, like it's just okay, she's Latina, but at the end of the day, when she walked into that space, she was playing an American white woman, right? So like that's what they saw, and it's not like it's something that's opening doors,
right?
For, like darker people. And I say this as someone like I was a casting call kid when I was younger, and the reason I got into my work was because of like the racism that exists in that space. You feel me? Like my parents were the kind that would like stay up and look at casting calls with me and my sister. And there was this one time, it was like a back to school commercial. And the caption says something like, the description says something like, oh, Caucasian girl, 9 to 12, something like that. That was the first time I heard the word Caucasian. I didn't understand it. Like, I was really young. I must have been like 8, and I thought I saw Asian, so I was just like, is that a type of Asian? Like I was really confused
Right.
by the word, and then my dad explained it to me, and I'm like, so like black at the time we used Hispanic, so I was like, so black and Hispanic girls don't go to school? I'm like, that was the first thing I thought of. I was so pissed. I was like, why don't even white girls?
Right.
You feel me? And my dad was just like, I'm never gonna forget that conversation, because he literally like was like, media is programming. Like my dad was also a journalist, and he was like, communication, media, all these things, this is programming. If you let them think that you don't belong or that you have to be erased out of this, then that's what's gonna happen. And like words have power. So he pretty much low key like got me into writing because of that. Like he gave me this huge lecture like about things, and I always think about that moment, because for so long so many of us didn't feel seen, and it's because of situations like that. Like, how you building a back to school commercial and you asking for white girls? Like,
right.
y'all go to school. And
right. Well, I mean, even the one thing my girl and I joke about, because she grew up watching this show, but like Sex in the City, when you watch it back now, it's like you made a show about New York City and there are no people of color in it.
Yes.
That is crazy.
Yes.
And nobody thought about that. It was wild.
Yes. And there was so much like I was rewatching it and I was like, ooh,
yeah,
there's a lot of problematic things going on here.
Yeah, but like, but you don't even question. Like, growing up, I didn't question any of this shit, right? Like, it all just seems so fucking normal. And to your point, it's because media does program us, right? It's so true.
Yeah, it programs us to believe that. And this is why that conversation of representation is so important, because a lot of people be like, oh, so like I need to see someone like me to believe. And I'm like, yeah, you do.
Yeah.
That's how you're gonna know like it's achievable, when you're constantly being told that like you're in if you're constantly visually told, right? Like not said actually word for word, that you aren't valuable and that your features or your looks don't matter, then that's literally what you're gonna believe. Like I grew up in a time where like curly hair, braids, that's all seen as ghetto. Hoops were ghetto. So like those were respectability politics that I had to play into in corporate.
Sure.
When I first started off like a 17-year-old, because it's just like I'm constantly being told like, oh, you don't look presentable. And those are things we're unlearning now, but a lot of us come from a generation where we had to like play into that literally as for survival.
Yeah, no, that's a fact. And even if you are, because a lot of people who might disagree with this notion of diversity and inclusion and why it's so important. A lot of people will say, well, look at so-and-so. They are a Black person, a Latino person, and they are successful, right? So why can't you just do that? And I think, sure, they're the exception, but there's also this other level of, do you know how fucking taxing it is to be the only person who is representing something, right? Like the burden that you bear on your shoulders every time you do what you do, because you're the only person holding space in that kind of way. It's mentally fucking taxing, right? So it takes away from a bit of the joy of it. You know what I mean? It's like we have this extra responsibility that white people don't have, and I don't think that they realize oftentimes, is that like I'm not only representing myself, but I'm representing Latinos as a whole now, because I've been one of the lucky ones to take up space in a place that traditionally doesn't elevate people from my background, right? So I bear the burden of representing an entire community of people, which, as we started the show, is they can't even agree on certain things within their own, household, let alone now I have to bear the burden of being a good representative for them. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's fucking taxing in every way. And that's why diversity and inclusion are so important.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I agree with all of that.
and I appreciate your point. The last thing I'll say is honoring the producers and people nominated as well, because that is incredibly important. It is, not something that should be glossed over, because at the end of the day, it is people, like you said, who potentially could one day, create the opportunities that we're all looking for. But also historically, even behind the camera, Hollywood, it's something crazy. Like it might be like under 10% of people, even behind the camera, are of Latin descent, right? So it's still something to be honored, the fact that somebody from our community is living out their dreams, even if it's not front facing in front of the camera. So I appreciate that. Now, let's get to you and all that you do and all that you might be working on. I mean, I'm curious, you've written and hosted a ton of different things for a lot of, really well-known publications. What's kind of on your docket these days?
Yeah, so a lot of my work focuses on el movimiento, which is like
Mm.
literally all the genres under the Black diasporic movement, which is like
Mhm.
Dominican dembow, reggaeton, Latin trap, bachata, um,
Mhm.
a lot of like folklore music that's considered,
Yeah.
for example, bomba, palo, stuff like that. And pretty much a lot of my work has to do with decolonizing like Latin music, but also
Mm.
storytelling. So I'm pretty much known for a lot of like culture conversations on like navigating as a Caribbean Latina and like how that
Mm.
affects body politics,
Yeah.
sexuality, music, visibility. But then also like I worked with like all the big artists from like now, from like
Mhm.
old school, La Vieja Escuela, and I'm
Mhm.
constantly bringing like the intersections of like the parallels in hip hop and dance
Mhm.
on like reggaeton and like all like literally just storytelling like how all these things came to be.
Mhm.
These days I'm working on a lot of like Dominican based conversations because there was such a need of like storytelling, especially with Dominican dembow being like very, very popular now.
Mhm.
I've been considered like a music historian because I was the first one to storytell like the timeline of it and pretty much give visibility on those conversations and like the géneros on an
Mhm.
international US Latin level. So
Yeah.
a lot of my focus right now is making sure that I'm kind of creating bridges for Black Dominican artists and also like storytelling these things.
Mhm.
So there's gonna be a lot of cool shit coming out this year, like a lot of storytelling.
I love it. I love that so much. I'm curious. One question I want to ask you because you bring up Dominican Dembow, right? And you have a song like Titi Me Preguntó, right, from Bad Bunny, which is a gigantic song right now. It's even getting played on like hip hop stations here in New York City. Do you feel like that helps the movement of exposing the artists of that genre? Because it's very obvious that is a song that is based off of Dominican music, right? The tempo and all that stuff. Do you think that it helps elevate, other artists from the Dominican Republic, or does it kind of are people sort of responding to it thinking like it's just a Bad Bunny thing? What's kind of been your experience with that?
So I actually wrote the review of the album for Pitchfork. Haha,
Mm.
check it
Mhm.
out. Stop promoting.
A little, yeah, there you go. A little, I like it. A little plug. Nothing wrong with that.
I'm a big believer of multiple realities existing at once. We mentioned like multiple times throughout the interview, like nuance, right?
Sure.
Um, I like to navigate in a way where it's like I love celebrating, but also making space for critiquing. Like I love that album.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
it's a very like Caribbean diasporic album. We needed it for like joy.
Hmm.
We're
Yeah.
coming out of COVID. Like we just needed
Yeah.
joy, right?
Hmm.
My biggest problem is, and the way he did it the first time was the right way. He made space for Dembow by bringing in El Alfa and La Romana. He was very intentional.
Sure.
He was super intentional. Like por
Hmm.
siempre, he only had one Latino in that album, and that was El Alfa on a Dembow
Hmm.
track, co-produced by Tiny's half Dominican, Child is Dominican.
Hmm.
Like it was very intentional. Now he's
Sure.
in a different level where he's known globally. He has a whole lot of white privilege. He
Hmm.
only support because in hip hop multiple rappers from different regions can exist at the same time and are given their
Hmm.
flowers. But in the
Sure.
Latin space, when it comes to urbano, which I'm trying not to use that term, but el movimiento, like
Hmm.
they only make
Yeah.
space for one person. Like there could only be one at a time.
Right. Right.
So, you're in a space where it's like you're getting all these flowers and it's like with so much because it's not Titi Me Preguntó. It's so many tracks that has like Dominican influences, but also jargon and slang that is constantly looked
Hmm.
down upon in Latin America because to everyone else, our Spanish is ratchet and ghetto. You get what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So you're highlighting a
Hmm.
lot of things from our country, and you didn't even have one artist in that album.
Yeah.
One,
Yeah.
and he had space
That's a
to
good
do it.
point.
Like he had a lot of artists from different places.
Yeah.
I feel like
And I think he recorded part of it in the Dominican
yeah,
Republic, if I'm not
half of the
mistaken.
album was created, and like there was a few
Yeah.
like things like Kiko Crazy saying El Pampara, but like how dope would it have been that first Dominican Dembow Grammy would have been received by another Dominican too? Like that space could have been created if he would have just said like, oh, let me bring on Chimbala or somebody that is also popping. Because the thing is like, again, this industry is racist. What El Alfa has been able to do these past few years, no one takes note of it. Like the things he's been
100%.
The type of support he got, hip hop supporting his ass. Like it's hard for a lot of people on the Latin side to get that type of support.
Right.
Getting that support, that visibility, that Rosalia.
He played Madison Square Garden. Like he headlined Madison Square Garden, which is huge. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes, like there was a lot of space for things to be seen and to be recognized a long time ago. Like because you go to these functions where these awards are being held, and between breaks and their after parties, they're playing Black music. They're playing dembow. They're playing. You hear the music, but when it comes down to who's getting that visibility and who's being celebrated, you never see that, and that's always been like a problem. And when it comes to like Titi Me Preguntó, like it would have been great if he would have included a Dominican Black artist. He got that Grammy. They would have both gotten that Grammy. That's how you get visibility, like, and that's kind of like where I lie at.
So, I mean, to play devil's advocate, because in the video, he is sort of giving praise to the Dominican community of New York City, right? Right. So I think people will argue back with that. I think what you're saying is that's sort of like the bare minimum that somebody is doing, and you'd expect somebody to do a little bit more if they're truly about the culture.
Yeah, I think it's more systemic. Like if you really about it, like be about it. Like that's where I'm coming from, because like what's hard to take is the fact that like it's not just him. I'm not gonna put all this weight on one person. I'm always go back to the industry. Rosalia, Bad Bunny, everyone, there's always gonna be one that exists like that. There's always gonna be an artist that is able to bring certain sounds, but because their proximity to whiteness, they're going to be able to be accepted. But it's them understanding how much space they're taking and whether or not like they're willing to create space for the actual Black creators of those cultures and genres. Like it's the politics of everything, and sometimes it's not enough for it to just be visibly seen. Like, are these people being are they monetizing off of it? If you are making hella bread off of these tracks and the creators are living terribly, like that's a problem. And I'm not saying like El Alfa's living terribly, but like he could have gotten in any carajito that was like popping in the yard and make space for a lot of other people. That would have been a great opportunity, and I said that in my review that it was a missed opportunity. I did appreciate the fact that like he's made a lot of space for Dayan El Apachao. Like he's the guy that composed and made the muñeco for Después de la Playa. Like he brought him out on tour, so like that's something that is worth celebrating. But we have so much to progress as a community, and the thing is, like, there's always this idea of like, oh, but they're opening the doors, and I'm like, opening the doors for what? Like, we've constantly seen this throughout all our lifetime. Like, I'm gonna bring merengue, for example. When you think of merengue in the States, the first people that you think of are the white Latinos, like Olga Tañón, Elvi Crespo. You never think of like Johnny Ventura, Millie Quesada, like the Black artists that really had hold in the weight. And it's not to take away from the work from the latter, like they have done very important work, but who's given that visibility? And when you're in award shows that everyone's watching, they're seeing these shows as an authority. So what they're intaking is, oh yeah, this is the representation of merengue. This is what bachata is. You know what I mean? So it's like I would so be down for that argument if they can prove it with a different género from the past, because it's the blancamiento of this music in Latin America. It's a consistent reality, and it's the same story just being repetitive. And I think that's why this conversation, it has intensified so much, especially this year. Because one thing and this is the last thing I'm gonna get to, I know I'll be right.
No, you're good.
One thing that the George Floyd time proved was that Latin America did not give a fuck about racism until it became a social issue that was being pushed by that made huge movements in the US and started getting in the way of dollars. Okay, and that's something that I can say confidently as someone that navigate that space, that knows the type of comments that were being made that day. This was not something that people were checking for or cared for. So it's like now you see like certain approaches to things, but it's like we don't even know if it's a gimmick or if it's just to box something off so someone's dollars isn't affected. You feel me? So Titi me preguntó, I love that track.
It's good.
I love that track. I really wish though, and that's what's always gonna bring like the but, it's the and but type of thing.
Sure.
I really wish he would have included a Dominican artist. And as someone that navigates the space and seen like the struggle that community has, and also like the resistance and the discrimination that exists in the industry, like it's just tiring. It's tiring. It's tiring seeing these people use these movements and like not include the artists or like making sure that they're good.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think that, it's good to have this critique, right? I think people can just be like, listen, can we just appreciate it for the greatness that it is? Why do we have to keep finding something wrong with it? But I think you're right, is that we need to keep learning to do better because we haven't done, the right thing historically, right? So we need to keep having these conversations, as uncomfortable as they are, to push ourselves to learn and to be better for each other at the end of the day, right? And yeah, I think, even because I what I was kind of talking about and you answered, but like it's the idea a lot of people would say like, okay, well, he's exposing people to a genre of music they may have never heard otherwise, right? And then they say the trickle down effect will be somebody now hears this song, they learn about them Bo, and then they want to hear the other artists from it, right? But we live in a world where he doesn't have to do the trickle down effect anymore. He can just open the fire hose and let people really see the real thing, right? So I think that is a fair critique. Also, just came to pop, into my head was how dope would it have been to see somebody like Tokisha on that track giving the female's perspective, especially because they reference the difference between when like your aunt would ask, a boy if he had girlfriends, and if a girl, claimed she had a bunch of boyfriends, it was looked down upon. Like that would have been a really dope dynamic as well, I think, to kind of have just the music
feel like
head
for so long, I think what a lot of Dominicans, like what we were thinking, I didn't really think of this, but a lot of Dominicans did have like this space, held this space of like, maybe he's holding it for a remix, like,
right.
Let's not all too crazy, because a lot of people, a lot of my critique, surprisingly, Dominicans are against it. Like they're just like, girl, why are you fucking this up for us? Like, like they are, unless like they understand the dynamic, and like again, they don't navigate the industry the way I do, and they don't see things the way I do. And it's a conversation that slowly, like, I've been kind of building a bigger tribe on, and people are starting to understand and get the idea. But it's like, it's not something that is like always heavily supported. It's just like, especially from Dominicans on the island, like the difference with ideology and the way that like Dominicans here are just like, yeah, I'm kind of fucking tired of everyone making our music, but our people never get to be celebrated in these spaces. Compared to like Dominicans in that space, like, yo, we just want to have a seat at the table. Can you relax?
Right.
It's like, it's very crazy. And a lot of people in DR had this idea of like, yo, maybe he's gonna drop a remix, let's calm down.
Sadly, I don't think that remix is coming.
No.
Doesn't look like that remix is coming, but I really appreciate your perspective and you hop on the show. I really enjoy having these different nuances and different perspectives, even that are obviously going to be different than what I've experienced. I love to be able to learn and see where I'm falling short and try to apply being better at the end of the day. So I appreciate you coming on here. Where can people follow you and keep up with all that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, Jennifer Mota Val. And then you can follow my website, is Jenny Mota, JenniMota.com. And yeah, I'll be pretty much posting life as I go. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciated the
Of course.
conversation too. Like it was, these conversations could be mentally draining, but it was fun.
Sure.
It was
Good. I'm glad. I try to find a healthy balance.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Jennifer Mota, for hopping on. Love the conversation and all that she's doing and been working on. Absolutely amazing stuff. And now let's hear from y'all. Get your take on one of the stories that we discussed today. And we'll do it in our Ask a Gringo segment.
Ask a Gringo.
I have a question.
All right, so for this week's Ask a Gringo segment, I wanted to get your take kind of on this Karen story. We're doing something a little bit lighter, and this is based off of the Karens for Hire story. We found out that Jennifer, my guest, is the I'd like to speak to a manager type. So I wanted to see if anybody else out there is that. I'm gonna read a couple over here. Let's see. At Adri Reeve 94. Adri Reeve 94, maybe Adrian Rivas 94, I'm gonna guess. No, they say, I worked retail and dealt with those people. It sucks, so I'm always understanding. Yeah, I think it's a healthy balance, right? Because like I said, I had worked at a movie theater for a very long time and dealt with a lot of assholes and a lot of people that would be considered Karens these days who just want to complain about, anything and everything. I also worked in retail at Guitar Center. So I heard a lot of complaints, even though I was more behind the scenes handling like money and inventory. But I've heard my fair share of complaints is what I'm trying to say. And at the same time, I've also, I've been on the other end of a complaint. So yeah, I do get and I do feel bad for people in those environments. You're oftentimes set up to fail. And you're not, in a great position where there's so many different things going on. You're probably stretched really thin. So I do have a lot of empathy. But there are, I feel like bare minimums of just like, listen, I'm paying for a service. I expect at least, the bare minimum to be met. I expect, if I'm there to have a certain meal or an experience, like I should at least be able to get that experience that I spent my hard-earned money on, right? And I'm not going to belittle anybody or try to get anybody in trouble. But listen, if I'm spending my hard-earned money and people are just fucking slacking for no real good reason, then I have a problem. Of course, taking into consideration if it's like crazy busy at, let's say, at a restaurant and like maybe the waiter or waitress isn't super attentive, I would never call the manager on something like that. Regardless, even if it's like an empty thing and I feel like the waiter or waitress is slacking, I wouldn't call the manager on something like that. But certain situations definitely, I think you gotta check people. At Elizabeth_ZR says, only when it affects my daughter. Example, Starbucks not doing kid temperature on kids' hot chocolate. That's fair, right? Because that's actually a dangerous situation if they fuck that up. But I have a special bone to pick with Starbucks. Starbucks lives in a special place in hell in my mind. Especially, there's one around me here where I have the studio. And I refuse to go at this point, but like I'm a Dunkin' Donuts person at the end of the day. That's my whole thing. I like basically any other place aside from Starbucks, but I love Dunkin' Donuts. But my girl is a big Starbucks fan, so there have been times where just to make her happy, we'll drive to the Starbucks that's in the area, and they have like a drive-through. And actually, I think that they only have the drive-through open. They don't even bother opening the doors certain days. And when I tell you, I sat in this drive-through line that was probably only about 3 or 4 cars, including my own, for probably 45 minutes just to get 2 coffees. So, and I didn't complain, actually. I just made a decision I'm never going back there. So I feel like I'm more probably that type of person. I didn't write a letter to corporate because I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And I would watch the orders coming out in front of me of the cars, and they were just coffees. There was no real reason why it should have taken that long, for Starbucks to handle this drive-through order of about 4 people. By the time I left, it was like 10 cars deep because of how long it took. And then there's no like panic exit, you know what I mean? Which I think every drive-through should have. Like where if you're halfway through and you've just been sitting there for too fucking long, there's like a little exit that you can just get the hell out of there if it's been too much for you. Chick-fil-A needs to have that as well. Their drive-through is ridiculous. But yeah, I'm not the type to call the manager on something like that, even though I feel like corporate should know about how shitty this Starbucks is. I'm just refusing to go. And I feel like maybe I've also, after that experience, convinced my girlfriend to be Team Dunkin' Donuts. So we're winning right now. But man, I hate Starbucks so much for a multitude of reasons. But particularly this one that is near my studio, I absolutely hate. Anyway, moving on. This is this isn't for me to pick a bone with Starbucks, my local Starbucks, I should say. But man, that's it for our Ask A Gringo segment at DJ Dramos on Instagram. You want to be a part of these conversations. And now let's quickly tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, so we went in depth, especially on this topic. And again, big shout out to my guest this week, Jennifer Mota. But we talked about, man, there's a serious problem with white supremacists in Hollywood. Tenoch Huerta from Black Panther, Wakanda Forever was talking about this. And he also mentioned, the internalized racism that we have in the Latin community as a whole, the colorism that we know about historically that has happened. And I love the kind of the nuanced conversation that this led to. And I know we were a bit all over the place, so I apologize for anybody who may have found it hard to follow, or like maybe felt like we didn't have closure on all the things we were talking about. It's obviously something that, it's not going to be solved in a day. And there's so much nuance to our community and things that hold us back from being a really strong, united front. And I just think it's important to keep having these sorts of conversations, and being able to kind of recognize where we are, where we came from. But also, I think the one thing that's really coming to mind that we talked about that I thought was really powerful was that when I often talk about how our history is erased and it's by design, and how we're written out of the history books, that's absolutely true. But there's also a caveat to that where we're also our own worst enemies, because we hide a part of our history because we would rather be ignored and not spoken about than acknowledge the Black and African contributions that have been made to our culture, right? And the perfect example that Jennifer was talking about was hip hop, and us sort of writing ourselves out of the conversation of that history, especially when you talk about the earlier roots that she was talking about, just because it is centered around Blackness and the African ancestry of our culture, right? And we'd rather figure out ways to forget about that, and even if it means erasing our own stories as a result, we valued that as more important in the past, which is absolutely ridiculous if you think about it. But it just goes to show how strong the racism is and has been in our community, right? I think that, of course, there is, the historical white supremacy and colonialism is the overarching blame for this, but we also have to come to a point where we take responsibility for it and just stop the nonsense, And I think our generation is beginning to move in that direction, and having these conversations and holding ourselves accountable and holding the previous generations accountable. But, there's a lot of work to do, a lot of pain to be healed, and a lot of history that needs to be uncovered, that sadly we buried away for no real reason whatsoever. Now, moving on to Karens for hire. I think, listen, the less Karens that are out there harassing us in the streets, the better. So if they want to sit there and get their anger at the world off while, in the form of helping me get what I need from my local bank or something like that, I'm all for it. I would hire a Karen to do some good in the world. They owe us. And talking about eggs and all that stuff, I know it sounds like a silly conversation because we're just talking about eggs. But again, I think the thing that I take away from that conversation is that it showcases nobody gives a shit enough, at least. Nobody gives a shit enough to actually make any substantial change until it affects the elites of this country, right? And because the elites of this country have no issue paying a few more dollars for a carton of eggs or a few more dollars for some gallons of gas, it doesn't affect their everyday life. It doesn't change anything for them. The powers that be aren't really going to pay attention or actually implement any real change, because they historically, since the inception of this country, do not give a fuck about those who are in a disadvantage, right? The the notion of our country is, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. And they're basically saying like, well, if you are suffering and you don't like the way things are, just work harder so you can become one of the elites who doesn't get affected by this stuff. And that's such a fucked up way to think about our country, the people. It's immoral, to say that, in order for you to get any sort of care and to be treated as a full human being, you need to figure out a way to make yourself elite. And that's kind of what we've been taught in this capitalist society. So sadly, things like this are an example where it's very obvious that these companies and these supermarkets are price gouging us, the everyday person. But because, the elites of this world aren't going to bat an eye at it, it's not a priority for our politicians to run in and fix, right? Even if we're talking about it, we're not seeing any real change. And that's the irony of it, right? Because, what's sad is that a couple extra dollars of a gallon for gas for somebody who's already struggling, that makes a real difference for them, right? That makes it a scary question of whether or not they can make it to work that day, right? If somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck, or somebody who is, in that same situation trying to buy groceries for their family, having to make that decision. If they want to buy eggs, they now have to leave something else out of the cart because it's just too expensive, right? But again, the elites don't have that problem. So sadly, the people in power don't actually give a shit enough to investigate this and make any real change, right? Or at least do it in a way that, or at least do it in a time period that is quick enough that not too many people get affected by it, right? Because maybe they'll address this further down the line, when it becomes such a glaring issue that they can't look away from it anymore. But it's not on their priority list, and it's really sad. It speaks to the difference of the haves and the have-nots in this country. Now, on a more positive note, you have Ana de Armas getting the Oscar nod for the movie Blonde. She is the only Latina, only person of Latin representation in general, I should say, nominated for an Oscar. And she's actually the first Cuban to be nominated for a leading role at the Oscars as well, which is interesting because I think I'm reading an article. Andy Garcia was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He's Cuban. He was the first one. So she's the first Cuban to be nominated for a leading role, which is a beautiful thing. But I love the comment that Jennifer made about the people behind the scenes, right? Because I was willing to look, over that aspect, right? Just like a lot of people, because we see what's in front of the camera. But she's absolutely right. These are the people that potentially could be the ones that implement that change that we want to see, because when they get accolades like this one, it opens the doors for them to get opportunities, and hopefully they continue to open the door for the rest of us, right? And it's easy to kind of look past that, but in an industry where the percentage of Latinos, be it in front of or behind the scenes, is incredibly small, it's important for us to celebrate everybody who gets this nod, because they're all doing the work, and they're all, whether they're doing it on purpose or not, taking up space that hopefully opens the doors for more Latinos. So I want to give them their flowers as well. So I just want to quickly read some of the other nominees. You have the movie Argentina 1985 is nominated for Best International Feature Film, and it's directed by Santiago Mitre. You also have Guillermo del Toro nominated for Best Animated Feature Film for Pinocchio. You also have Puss in Boots: The Last Wish from DreamWorks, and that's starring Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek, nominated for Best Animated Feature. You have Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, and it is from the Mexican director Alejandro G. Inarritu. And I'm sorry if I fucking butchered that. And then you also have apparently the singer and actress Sofia Carson, who is Colombian, may perform at this year's Oscars, as she is the voice behind Diane Warren's nominated song Applause from the movie Tell It Like a Woman. Okay, so I always love anybody who can point out things to me that I'm falling short on. So I really do appreciate Jennifer saying that, because I do agree. I think it is frustrating because the representation, and when we talk about seeing yourself in others, it's always going to be the person in front of the camera that gives you that. But at the same time, anybody who wants to work in the entertainment industry and film and TV, whatever it is, and maybe isn't trying to be an actress, like these people are going to be the ones that they look up to, right? And again, on a grander scale, you hope that these people getting this sort of recognition and honor and sort of co-signed by their peers. You hope that this gives them the opportunity to open the doors for others, right? And that's what's incredibly important, is that we continue to kind of pass the baton down. And quickly on that topic of Bad Bunny, I think it's really important that we are even able to critique the artists that we love and the people that we love, right? Even in our own personal lives. And we critique them not because we want to put them down, but because we want to inspire them to become better. And I think we should all be like that. And we should all surround ourselves with people who push us to be better versions of ourselves because they truly love us, right? And yeah, I want to just make sure that, we weren't, it wasn't Bad Bunny slander. That's what I want to make sure I clarify. I think it's saying, of course, what he created and has done is amazing. He's an incredible artist, an incredible representative for the Latin community. But as with all of us, myself included, we can have blind spots, and we need to, be lovingly shown them, and hopefully we can grow and become better and apply the things that we've learned to continue to just become more evolved human beings and better representatives for our community. I know that's what I strive for, and I'm sure people like him do as well. So that was kind of, I feel like, the overarching sort of synopsis of that conversation, of the thesis, I should say, of that conversation. Now, with that said, thank you once again to my guest this week, Jennifer Mota, for hopping on. Thank y'all so much for listening to the show. Remember to check out my other podcast, The Street Stoic, Monday through Friday. Short, like 10 to 15 minute inspirational podcast combining hip hop lyrics and quotes with Stoic philosophy. Just meant to kind of like give you that extra shot of inspiration to start your day. A quick little 1-2 punch is what I've been calling it. You got that podcast kind of when you're up and getting ready, and then you throw this one on when you're maybe commuting to work or, doing whatever you're doing throughout the course of your day. So check that out. Like, review, follow it. All that stuff really, really does help out as we're trying to build that one up as well. And thank you so much for checking out, this podcast. I'm going to go enjoy the rest of my birthday weekend. Thank you to everybody that has given me some birthday wishes. I feel loved. I really do appreciate you guys so much. And I'll catch y'all on Tuesday with a brand new episode. Until then, have an amazing weekend and stay safe. Peace.